Welcome, dear listener. You've found your way to Driftwood Stories, where the night is soft, the moon is kind, and old tales rise like mist between the trees. Here, beneath the hush of starlight and the rustle of ancient leaves, we open the weathered pages of another fairy tale. One woven from silence, sunlight and song. Let the day fall behind you now. Imagine a path, cobbled and mossy, winding through a forest where time grows still. Lanterns flicker in cottage windows, and the wind carries the scent of lavender and wood smoke. All around, the world settles into slumber. Tonight we follow a tale as old as ivy on stone. A tale of a girl in a tower, of golden hair, of starlit songs, of love that waits and love that finds. So draw your blanket closer, let your breath slow, and drift now, gently, into the story of Rapunzel. Chapter 1. The Craving and the Curse. Long ago, when the skies were wider and time walked slower, there was a small thatched cottage resting at the hem of a quiet village. It sat where cobblestones gave way to moss, and where fences grew soft with vines, and beyond its wooden gate stretched the edge of an ancient forest. A forest whispered about in songs and warnings. In this cottage lived a humble man and his wife. They were not wealthy, nor especially clever, but they had love between them, the kind that grows quietly, season after season, through hardship and gentle mornings. The man worked as a wood carver, shaping spoons and bowls from fallen limbs, while the woman kept a garden and spun wool when the light was good. Their life was modest, with days shaped by firelight and the sound of wind against windows. But even the sweetest life can ache with emptiness, and for many years their cottage was silent where laughter should have echoed. The cradle near the hearth remained empty, and though the woman's smile never faltered, there was a sorrow that settled in her gaze like frost upon a window. Then one spring, after countless prayers cast into moonlight and wells, the woman found herself changed. She rose one morning and stood longer than usual at the basin, her hand resting against her belly, her face held in the mirror's silence. And then came the tears, quiet and astonished. The miracle had come at last. Joy bloomed between them like wildflowers, laughter spilling out of windows, arms wrapping around each other in reverent disbelief. They spoke to the unborn child in the evenings, made plans they scarcely dared believe. But as the days passed, something curious began to stir. It started with a dream. The woman standing in a sunlit garden, surrounded by herbs and blossoms so fragrant they felt like music. One plant in particular called to her, its leaves slender and green, its purple stems reaching gently toward the sky. She woke with its name on her lips, Rapunzel. From that moment on, nothing else would do. She found herself drawn to the back of their cottage, where the kitchen window overlooked a tall stone wall that rose like a silent sentinel beyond the hedgerow. Behind it, hidden from most eyes, lay a walled garden said to belong to no one, or rather, to someone never seen. The villagers never spoke of it directly, save in hushed tones and sidelong glances. They called it the witch's garden, and they meant it quite literally. But the woman was not afraid, only entranced. Each day her gaze returned to that wall. She would press her hand to her belly and whisper to the child growing inside, her words soft and pleading. "Just a taste," she'd say, "just a few leaves." Her hunger deepened into ache. Food lost its flavour. Water made her ill. By the third week, she grew pale and listless, her voice thinning to a whisper. Her husband grew frantic. "What is it you need?" he begged, kneeling beside her, hands trembling. She took his fingers in hers and said, "There is a plant in that garden, beyond the wall, Rapunzel. If I do not have it, I fear I shall fade, and so shall she." The man's heart split. He knew the stories, of course, the warnings, the whispers, the pale-eyed woman said to walk that garden by moonlight. But love, when true, does not tally danger. It moves forward like a river over stone. So, when night arrived, quiet and silvered, the man donned his wool cloak and crept through the trees behind their home. The moon watched him pass like a slow, sorrowful eye. He found the wall without trouble, its surface blanketed in thick ivy, and found, near the western edge, a crumbled portion half swallowed by brambles. With care, he climbed over. The moment his boots touched the soil, he knew the stories had not lied. The garden was alive in a way no ordinary earth should be. The air shimmered faintly, like heat but cold, and the flowers glowed at their edges as if painted with stardust. No insects buzzed, no birds sang, only a deep, slow hum like the earth itself was breathing. And there it was, the Rapunzel, delicate, radiant, dew-laced. It grew in circular patches, as though tended by invisible hands. The man knelt quickly, cut a handful with shaking fingers, and turned to leave. He returned to his wife, and when she tasted the leaves, colour flushed her cheeks. She wept with relief and laughter, holding his face in her hands. The babe stirred for the first time in her belly. But the next night, her longing returned, fiercer, more urgent, and so again, under a thickening sky, he returned. This time he did not make it far. As he stooped to gather another handful of the shining herb, the garden suddenly darkened, not with cloud or storm, but with presence. From behind a tree a figure stepped forward. She was tall and motionless, robed in green, the colour of deep moss. Her hair was black as riverstone, and her eyes held seasons, not merely years, but eras. "How dare you," she said softly, "steal from what is not yours?" The man dropped the herb and fell to his knees, hands raised in trembling apology. "Please," he said, "it was for my wife. She carries a child. She hungers for your plant. I feared for her life, for the child's life. I had no other hope." The woman did not move. Her gaze pierced him, weighing his soul. After a long silence she spoke. "Then take what she needs. And know this, nothing in this world is truly free." The man looked up, hope flickering. "But," she continued, "when your child is born, she will be mine." The words struck like ice. "No," he gasped. "Please, anything but that." "You bargained the moment you stepped into my garden," she said. "You came again. You took more. Life answers life." Tears ran down the man's cheeks. "She is my heart." "She will be safe," the woman said. "She will live, and she will be raised in a place no hunger can reach." And before he could cry out again, the woman dissolved into the shadows, her robes becoming mist. He returned home with empty hands and a heavy soul. He told his wife only that he had seen someone, that they must be careful now. But she, flushed with health, her belly round and warm, did not press him. She slept peacefully that night, unaware that the stars had shifted. When the child came, golden-haired, bright-eyed, the very image of dawn, she brought laughter back to the cottage. For a day there was joy, for a night there was light. But at the moment between night and morning, when the stars still linger and the sun is not yet born, she came. The woman from the garden stepped through the door, silent as breath, and stood at the foot of the bed. "She is mine," she said simply. The mother clutched the child, but the woman did not take her by force. She only opened her arms, and the baby, curious, unafraid, reached toward her as if recognizing something old, something eternal. "I will name her Rapunzel," said the woman, "for the plant that bound your lives to mine." And with that, she turned and vanished into the grey light of morning. The cradle was empty, the house was silent, and the trees beyond the village swayed like watchers, bearing witness to the beginning of a story not yet known. Chapter 2. The Enchantress's Garden. Rapunzel's earliest memories were not of cradle songs or warm arms, but of leaves whispering secrets and shadows dancing upon her walls. Her nursery was not hung with lace, nor carved from polished oak. It was grown, shaped by time and spell into the hollow heart of a towering tree. The walls were alive, breathing bark that pulsed gently with life. At night, mushrooms glowed in soft clusters along the floor, casting silver light across a moss-covered bed. Ferns hung down like curtains, swaying gently with every sigh of the wind. The one who raised her was called nothing by name. Rapunzel simply knew her as her. The voice that woke her, the hands that fed her, the shadow that moved between sun and stone. To the world she might have been witch, enchantress, fay, or something older still. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was in tones low and rooted, like the earth itself had formed words for the first time. But she tended the girl with quiet purpose. Rapunzel wanted for nothing, save company. Food appeared as if summoned, sweet roots, honeyed bread, berries plucked with dew still clinging. She wore dresses of spider silk and spun flax, and her toys were carved from smooth driftwood. As she grew, Rapunzel came to know the garden that encircled her world, or, more precisely, encased it. It was vast and circular, filled with blooms of every colour and fragrance. Violets grew beside blood poppies, lavender alongside silver fern. Willow trees bent to kiss her hair as she passed, and the air was often thick with floating seeds that looked like snow caught mid-fall. It was the only world she had ever known, and for a time it was enough. But it was not free. All around the garden ran a wall of thorns, tall, dense, and ancient. The brambles twisted together in an ever-blooming cage, with barbs like hooked glass. No door, no gate, no weakness. Rapunzel had once, just once, pressed her palm against them in innocent curiosity. The thorn bit deep, and she had cried for hours, not only from pain, but from the sudden understanding that she was trapped. When she asked why, The woman merely said, "The world beyond is not for you. It is filled with mouths. It will consume your light." "But I want to see the sky," Rapunzel had whispered once, around the age of 6. "You see it already," the woman replied, not unkindly, as she poured tea made from crushed moon blossoms. "You see it better from here than you ever would out there." The sky was her favourite. She would lie in the moss and watch the clouds drift past like thoughts. Sometimes she would stretch her golden hair across the grass and imagine it growing long enough to catch the clouds. Her hair was already far longer than any child should be, shining, thick and silken, nearly reaching the garden floor even as a young girl. The woman never cut it. "It's your tether," she said. "It anchors you. You must never sever what ties you to safety." So Rapunzel learned to braid, long intricate braids with flowers woven in, ropes of gold that followed her wherever she walked, coiling behind her like sunlight itself. She sang often, mostly to herself. Sometimes old songs the woman taught her, in a tongue she didn't understand, but somehow felt. Sometimes melodies of her own, wordless and wandering. The garden seemed to listen. Trees leaned in closer, leaves rustled softly. Even the wind changed its path to pass through her notes. Her voice was her other gift. One day, while she was sitting beneath the arch of a flowering vine, the woman approached holding a woven mirror. It was not made of silver or glass, but of polished obsidian framed in curled bone. She handed it to Rapunzel without explanation. Rapunzel looked into it, and for the first time truly saw herself. She was lovely, pale as milk, eyes large and green as dew-dappled ivy. Her hair spilled across her shoulders like sunrise, but it wasn't her reflection that held her gaze. It was the reflection of the sky above her. For a brief, impossible moment, she thought she saw something move there, something outside. A bird. It startled her, not because it was frightening, but because it was new, a shape not shaped by magic, a thing uninvited. "There are birds beyond the wall," she said, unable to look away. "There are teeth beyond the wall," the woman replied, taking back the mirror and placing it high on a branch where Rapunzel could not reach. Still, from that day forward, Rapunzel listened more closely to what lay beyond. She began asking questions. What lies past the garden? Why do the birds never land here? Why does the wind carry voices I don't know? The woman would sometimes answer gently, sometimes not at all. "There is only here," she said once, "and I have kept it so." But the world would not remain silence forever. One dusk, the wind changed. It carried with it the scent of smoke, not the kind from their cooking fire, but the kind of distant chimney smoke, tinged with sap and pine. Rapunzel inhaled and felt something shift inside her chest, a longing she could not name. That night the woman left. She did not say where she was going. She often disappeared, sometimes for days, and always returned with curious objects. Feathers tied with red string, bones polished smooth, coins that glowed faintly in the dark. Rapunzel would find them tucked into corners of the garden, offerings or warnings, she never knew which. But this time she left a little longer, and in her absence Rapunzel climbed. There was a tree in the far corner of the garden, old, half dead, but taller than the rest, its branches twisted like fingers reaching skyward. It took her most of the day to reach the top, and from there she saw. Beyond the wall of thorns, beyond the thick green that had always marked the edge of her world, lay a forest, vast and wild and humming with life. Trees she had never touched, birds she had never heard, smoke curling from some distant hearth. She stared until her eyes blurred with tears. So much world, so much she'd never been told. She climbed down with trembling limbs, heart pounding. That night she sang, but this time the song was different. No longer a lullaby to herself, no longer a soft echo to pass the hours. It was a calling, a yearning spun into melody that rose through the trees like incense. And far, far away, a figure on horseback, lost in the forest and weary from travel, paused. He tilted his head, closed his eyes, and heard it. A voice, clear, sorrowful, beautiful, calling from somewhere no path had ever led him. He dismounted and stepped into the trees, chasing a song not meant for him. Not yet, but soon. Chapter 3. A Tower for the Moon. Time moved strangely in the garden. Days folded into one another like petals, seasons whispered past in the rustle of trees, and Rapunzel, who had never seen a calendar, never marked her height on a doorframe, only knew she was changing because her dresses grew shorter and her thoughts grew longer. She had passed from girlhood into something quieter, more wistful, and the woman who had raised her began to change as well. The Enchantress, for that is what Rapunzel had come to call her in her mind, no longer moved with the steady rhythm she once had. Her robes were heavier, her eyes shadowed. She would sit for long hours at the stone table, staring into a bowl of still water, lips whispering things Rapunzel couldn't hear. And then one day, without warning, she said, "It is time." "Time for what?" Rapunzel asked, pausing in the act of threading white blooms into her braid. "You are growing too large for this place," said the Enchantress. "Too curious, too loud. It is no longer safe." "I haven't done anything," Rapunzel said. But her voice was small. The Enchantress looked at her then, not in anger, but in something worse, pity. "This garden was never meant to hold you forever." Then she stood, gathered her staff of twisted willow, and walked to the centre of the clearing. The ground trembled, birds scattered. Rapunzel watched, wide-eyed, as the earth itself began to shift. Roots curled inward, stones rose like teeth from the moss. Trees groaned as they moved aside, and in the centre of it all a tower began to grow, not built but summoned, from living wood and ancient stone. It spiralled upwards, reaching for the clouds, its walls twined with ivy, its windows narrow as arrow slits. When it was done, the clearing was still again. The Enchantress turned to her. "This is your new home." Rapunzel felt a chill pass through her. "But I don't want a new home." "It is not a matter of want," the woman said. "You have been seen, you have been heard." She did not explain further. That night, under the thick blue hush of twilight, she led Rapunzel to the tower. There was no door, no staircase, only a single window, high above, facing the east, where the moon rose. The Enchantress murmured something low, and Rapunzel felt her hair tighten, tug gently from her braid, drawn upward by invisible hands. It twined into a thick rope, shining and strong, and lifted her slowly, like a kite caught in reverse gravity, until she hovered at the window. Then the spell released, and she tumbled gently inward, landing on the wooden floor with a thud and a gasp. The window sealed behind her. She was alone. The tower had one room. Its floor was round and smooth, shaped from polished oak. There was a bed made of moss and feathers, a small hearth, a stone basin for washing. Books lined one curved wall, strange, heavy tomes with embossed covers and titles that flickered when read aloud. A single beam of sunlight passed through a slit in the stone near the ceiling, warming a patch of floor no larger than a cat. And there was her voice. More than ever, it became her companion. She sang not to pass the time, but to shape it. She made music to mark the days, morning melodies, noon hums, lullabies for the stars. She sang to the birds who passed overhead, to the sun as it crossed the slit of light, to the dust motes that danced in her lonely room. Her voice changed with her body, deeper, richer, aching with something unnamed. Time passed. It may have been months, it may have been years. The Enchantress visited rarely. She never climbed. Instead, she would stand far below and call, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And down it would fall, golden, thick, a living ladder. The Enchantress would climb, robes whispering against the braid, her hands never kind, but never cruel. She brought Rapunzel small things, dried fruit, beeswax candles, fresh linen. Once she brought her a shard of mirror. "To remind you who you are," she said. But when Rapunzel looked into it, all she saw was a girl caught in glass. One evening, while the sky was painted in the dusky blush of sunset, Rapunzel stood at the window with her hair braided and ready, waiting for the Enchantress's voice. The trees below swayed gently, and a soft breeze stirred the loose tendrils that framed her face. But instead of the familiar call, she heard something different. A crack of twigs, a pause, and then a voice. A man's voice, low, unsure, curious. He was speaking to himself, or perhaps to the woods. I know I heard it. That voice, where did it come from? Rapunzel's breath caught. She ducked from the window, heart pounding like a drum. Who was he? How had he come this close? No one had ever wandered near. No one had ever spoken from below. Then, foolishly, fearfully, wonderfully, she did something strange. She sang, just one note, a high silver sound like a bell from some distant chapel. Below there was silence. Then the voice returned, clearer now. "Hello? Who's there?" She said nothing, but she sang again. This time the note carried her longing. Not just sound, but soul. It rose into the air, curling around the tree trunks, reaching beyond the garden that had become her prison. And the man, the prince, though she did not yet know his name, stood beneath the tower, struck still by wonder. He did not see her, but he knew the voice would bring him back. That night Rapunzel could not sleep. She lay upon her moss-soft bed, her hair fanned out around her like a golden sea, her thoughts drifting far beyond the curved walls. The voice, the man's voice, echoed in her chest like the low toll of a distant bell. It had been warm, unsure, real. Someone else was out there, not a shadow, not a lesson, not the Enchantress, a person. She had not realized how deeply she'd hungered for that. And though the Enchantress came the next day, climbing her hair with no mention of visitors or strangers, Rapunzel found her mind barely attending to the woman's instructions or warnings. Her heart was too full of questions she dared not ask. 3 nights later, the voice returned. This time it called up softly, as if testing the very air. "I know you're there. I heard you again today. I followed your song." Rapunzel remained hidden from the window, crouched low and trembling, unsure what to say. I don't mean harm," he added. "It's just your voice. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, and I don't know who you are." Still she said nothing, but her silence grew heavy. Finally, with breath like a falling leaf, she sang a single word. "Hello." The quiet below held for a moment, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. "Then, there you are." His voice changed, softened. It sounded like someone who had found something long lost. "I've been searching for this place for days. I thought I dreamed it. The song, I mean." Rapunzel stepped closer to the window now, so close the wind touched her cheek. Her hair caught the breeze and danced like a veil. She did not yet show her face. "You're a stranger?" she said carefully. "I am," he replied, "and I'll stay a stranger if you wish it. But I'd like to speak with you. Just speak." Silence. Then, "Why?" There was a pause. "Because your voice made the world feel new, and because something tells me you don't get many visitors." A strange laugh, part joy, part ache, slipped from Rapunzel's lips. "You'd be the first," she said. He laughed too. "Well, that's something, isn't it?" He did not ask her to come down, did not ask to see her face. Instead, he sat beneath her window and they talked. Not of grand things, not yet, but of little ones, of trees and the scent of rain, and what stars looked like from different angles. He told her of rivers he'd ridden beside, of mountain peaks that vanished into clouds. He was a prince, he said, but only after she asked, and even then he said it softly, as though unsure it mattered. He called himself Theron. The name felt odd on her tongue, but she liked the sound of it, like warm stone and running water. He returned the next evening, and the next, and then every evening the weather allowed. Each time she sang him to the tower, and each time they talked until the stars burned low. She never let him see her, never let him climb, but in time he began to bring her things, folded drawings of places he had seen, pressed flowers wrapped in ribbon, poems written in his own careful hand. She kept them all hidden in the floorboards. She asked him once, "Why do you keep coming back?" And he answered without hesitation, "Because when I'm here it feels like the world has stopped, but in the best way. As if this moment could stretch forever, and I wouldn't mind." Rapunzel's hands curled in her lap. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than breath. "I've never been anywhere else." He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Then let me be your elsewhere." She turned her face toward the window and, for the first time, let a shaft of moonlight fall across her cheek. Below, Theron stood with his face turned up, his eyes wide with wonder, lips parted as if a hymn had just been sung into his soul. And though they did not touch, though stone and sky still divided them, something shifted that night. A promise, unspoken but felt, a tether of its own. The next morning the Enchantress climbed Rapunzel's hair with a grim look clouding her face. She said little. Prowled the tower like a cat in suspicion. Her fingers brushed the window ledge. Her eyes flicked toward the floorboards where poems lay hidden. She paused only once, looking Rapunzel full in the face. "Your voice has been loud," she said softly. "I've always sung," Rapunzel replied, careful to keep her hands still. "Not like this." That evening, as the sun dipped low, Theron returned. He brought no drawing, no poem, only a question. "Let me see you." "I have," she whispered. He smiled. "More than that, please. Let me come up." Her heart thundered. Her hands shook. "Then I don't know how." He looked up. "Then I'll find a way." And with that he disappeared into the trees. Rapunzel remained at the window long after the stars rose, her braid unbound and trailing across the floor, her heart aching with something vast and unfamiliar. Hope. Something was beginning. Something the tower had not prepared her for. Chapter 4. The Prince of the Pines. It began with a rope, not woven of hemp or twine, but fashioned of clever knots and quiet daring. Theron returned the very next evening, as promised, and with him came a coil of rope slung over his shoulder, still smelling faintly of horse and pine resin. He waited below the tower until her voice came, soft, uncertain. "I don't know if this is wise. I never claimed to be wise," Theron called back, tying the rope to a thick branch of the nearby pine tree. "But I'm a fairly decent climber. Unless you've another suggestion." There was a long pause. Then, shyly, Rapunzel said, "You could ask." Theron blinked, 1 foot already on the trunk. "Ask?" There was laughter in her voice. "You're standing under a magic tower. You might try the words that work." Theron tilted his head, grinning. He stepped back, spread his arms like a performer before a royal court, and declared to the sky, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." The silence that followed was thick with wonder, and then from the high window her golden braid tumbled downward like a river of light, thick and shining, impossibly long, swaying gently in the air. Theron stepped forward, hands reverent, and grasped the braid. It was warm beneath his palms, real in a way dreams never are. He climbed. The tower seemed to hum with anticipation as he ascended, every step a slow defiance of solitude. And when he reached the window, Rapunzel was there, flushed, breath held, eyes wide. She did not move, neither did he. Up close she looked both older and younger than he expected, timeless in a way the forest sometimes is. Her skin bore no mark of sun or wind, her dress simple, her face open and searching. "You're real," he whispered. "You too," she said, stepping aside. He entered the tower. It was round and soft, lit by candles in hollowed stones, scented with lavender and dried apples. Everything was neat. Every corner held quiet. and yet it felt full, not empty, full of time, of songs, of solitude turned tangible. Theron sat on the floor, Rapunzel opposite him, legs crossed. They stared for a while, smiling without quite knowing why. They talked of small things first, favourite foods, stories from childhood, animals they'd seen or only heard of. She asked him if frogs really croaked that loudly. He asked if her hair had always been so long. They laughed, and it was the kind of laughter that slips past the ribs and stays there. As the candlelight deepened, Theron pulled from his coat a small book, a leather-bound journal, worn at the edges. "I brought this," he said, "to show you the world." He opened it to pages covered in sketches, forests, rivers, castles, mountains that touched the clouds. There were maps, too, drawn in his hand with notes in the margins. "This path smells of pine. Sweetwater spring here. Too many bees." Rapunzel traced the drawings with one finger, wonder in her eyes. "It's so much. It's not even half of what I've seen," Theron said gently, "and not even a sliver of what I want you to see." Her gaze met his, and something passed between them. Not a promise, not yet, but the beginning of one. They met almost every night after that. The pattern became its own kind of spell. As dusk painted the forest in indigo and gold, Rapunzel would lean from her window, waiting. Theron would emerge from the trees, hand raised in greeting, a grin already tugging at his lips. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel," he would call, "let down your hair." And she would. She began to keep 2 braids, one for the Enchantress and one for him. Theron's was tied with a blue ribbon he had given her, the colour of summer sky. Sometimes he brought books or sweet things wrapped in cloth. Once he brought a small white feather tucked into a carved box. "From a snow owl," he said. "They don't often let you near." She kept it beside her pillow. But more than gifts, he brought conversation, a world unspooling in words. Rapunzel drank in his stories like water. He told her of vast marketplaces with spice-laden air, of glassy lakes that reflected the stars perfectly, of musicians who played flutes made of silver bone. She asked about windmills, about thunder, about what snow felt like on bare skin. He answered every question with patient joy, and sometimes, just sometimes, she would sing for him. Softly, barely louder than breath, but it was enough. He would sit with his eyes closed, lost in her voice, the tower walls shimmering faintly with the magic of it. "If your song had shape," he said once, "it would be a bridge." "To where?" she asked, smiling. "To me, but shadows do not rest forever." One evening Theron did not come. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No bird song, no breeze. Rapunzel waited until the stars had turned halfway across the sky. Then she climbed into bed, her braid still trailing from the window, and curled into herself. The next night she waited again, and again. Her chest felt tight, her mouth dry. On the 4th evening she stood at the window, both braids prepared, neither lowered. The forest below remained silent. She did not cry, not yet, but something inside her folded shut. Then, just as the last light faded, a figure stepped from the trees. Limping, covered in bramble scratches and mud. "Rapunzel!" came the hoarse voice. She gasped. "Theron!" He looked up, grinning through blood and dirt. "I found the wrong tower, twice." She laughed, half joy, half sob, and lowered her braid with shaking hands. He climbed slower this time, every movement careful. When he reached the window, she pulled him into the room with more strength than she knew she had. He collapsed beside her, breathing hard. "I thought I wouldn't make it back." "You always do," she whispered, pressing a cloth to the cut above his brow. They sat there for a long while, side by side, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. Neither spoke of what might have happened. Neither dared ask how close he had come to not returning. But Rapunzel held his hand tighter than ever, and Theron looked at the candlelight flickering on her cheek and thought, "I cannot lose this. Whatever must be risked, whatever must be defied, he would do it. Because her tower might rise toward the moon, but she deserved the earth, the wind, and the stars, and he would give them to her." Chapter 5. Love and Locks. The summer deepened, golden and lush, and within the tower Rapunzel's heart bloomed. Her world, once shaped by moss and silence, now moved to the rhythm of footfalls at dusk and laughter under candlelight. She waited for Theron's voice each evening the way one waits for spring, with breath held and hope like a bloom pressed tight in the chest. They did not speak of love at first. They did not need to. It grew in the spaces between their words, in the way she braided his hair as he read aloud, in the way he traced her fingers while she hummed into the dusk. Once, while lying side by side on the wooden floor, their hands just barely touching, he asked, "What would you do if you could leave?" Rapunzel blinked. "Leave? If the tower were no longer your world, if the thorn wall were gone, if I could carry you beyond the trees." She was silent for a long while. Then she said softly, "I think I'd walk until I couldn't stand, sleep beneath real stars, drink from a river, touch stone that isn't carved by spell. And after that," she turned to him, her hair catching the lamplight like a halo, "come home to you." Theron didn't answer. He only pulled her gently into his arms and let the silence say what neither could yet name. But magic listens, and love, when secret, stirs the air like wind before a storm. The Enchantress began to feel it. She arrived one morning, earlier than usual, her voice sharp and dry. "Rapunzel, let down your hair." Up she climbed, robe dragging like moss, eyes cold and quiet. Rapunzel, sensing something had shifted, stood straighter than usual, smoothing the front of her dress, hiding the ribbon Theron had given her behind her braid. The Enchantress stepped inside and looked around. "You've been singing less. I've been reading more," Rapunzel said, carefully neutral. The woman's gaze flicked to the hearth, to the pillows newly fluffed, to the table where crumbs of sweet cake lingered. She said nothing, but something darkened behind her eyes. She stayed longer than usual, touched the mirror, sniffed the air, and just before she left, turned with a look of quiet warning. "Be careful with your heart," she said, voice like a wind through bone. "It may not be yours to keep." That night Theron returned full of news. "My father is returning to the eastern capital," he said. "He wants me to join him, but I told him I couldn't. Not yet." Rapunzel looked at him, something anxious flickering in her chest. "You told him why?" "No," he said quickly. "But I think it's time I did." She looked down, braiding and unbraiding her hair. "If your family knew, what would they say?" Theron hesitated. "They would try to stop me. And would you let them?" He reached for her hand. No one could. And in that moment, she knew what she wanted. Not just time. Not just evening visits and secret songs. She wanted a life. With him. And that night, beneath the candle's glow, she whispered, "I love you." Theron, wide-eyed and breathless, pulled her close. "I've loved you since the first moment I heard your voice." Their kiss was slow and full of promise, and the tower, for a little while longer, kept their secret. But secrets do not keep themselves. Weeks passed, sweet and bright, until one morning Rapunzel, drowsy with dreams, turned to the Enchantress and asked without thinking, "Why do you never bring me the wild pears any more? They help with the queasiness." The world stopped. The Enchantress froze, her face draining of colour. "What queasiness?" she asked, voice like snapped ice. Rapunzel blinked. "Just mornings, sometimes." The woman stepped forward. "Let me see your hands." Rapunzel held them out, puzzled. The Enchantress touched her wrists. Her brow pressed her fingers to Rapunzel's belly, and something shifted. The spell around the tower pulsed, sharp, cold. The air thickened. A sound, low and old, groaned through the walls. "You foolish child," the Enchantress whispered. Rapunzel stepped back. What's happening?" "You have betrayed me," the woman said, her eyes now burning, her voice dark with hurt and fury. "You let someone inside. You've given yourself away." "No," Rapunzel cried. "I haven't. I feel it," the Enchantress hissed. "The thread has been pulled, the tower unravelled, the seed planted." She stopped short. Her breath caught. "You are carrying his child." Rapunzel's knees gave way. She fell back against the bed, shaking. "I love him," she said. "He loves me. That isn't betrayal." But the Enchantress would not hear it. "You were mine," she said. "My work, my silence, and now, spoiled by love." She lifted her staff. The candles snuffed out. The floor cracked, and then everything vanished in a rush of dark wind. When Rapunzel awoke, she was cold. She lay on a bed of reeds, not moss. Her dress was tattered, her feet bare. Around her, trees stretched tall and unfamiliar. The tower was gone, the sky above her open and vast. She was alone, but not entirely. One hand drifted to her belly, and she began to cry, not for the tower, not for the Enchantress, but for Theron, who would come to the tower that night and find it empty. And he did. He called up joyfully, as always, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your—" Nothing. Silence. Then he saw the cut braid hanging from the window, severed clean, swaying like a pendulum in the breeze. His heart stopped. No. He climbed it anyway, hand over hand, each grip a prayer. The room was dark, cold, dusty as if abandoned for centuries. She was gone, and then, from the shadows, a voice. "You." He turned. The Enchantress stood by the hearth, her eyes wild. "You did this," she said. "Where is she?" he asked, voice raw. "She is lost to you." "No!" He charged forward, but the spell came faster. With a flick of her hand, she raised a wind that howled through the stone. Theron screamed as light poured into his eyes, not warmth, but burning. And then darkness, true, final darkness. He fell from the tower, landing among thorns. The Enchantress vanished, and the forest swallowed them both. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Theron wandered blind through the pines, bleeding and broken, guided only by memory and dream. He no longer called her name. He barely remembered his own. Only her voice remained, echoing through his mind like the last song of a vanished bird. And Rapunzel wandered too, barefoot and heavy with child, through forests she had never known, following rivers, singing lullabies to herself in hopes that one day, he would hear her. Chapter 6. The Fall and the Banishment. The forest did not welcome her, not at first. It was wild and unknowable, filled with creaking trees that whispered behind her back, winds that howled without warning, paths that vanished the moment she turned her head. Rapunzel wandered, barefoot and disoriented, one hand wrapped protectively around her belly. Her golden hair, once combed and clean, now tangled with burrs and leaves. The hem of her dress was torn, stained with mud and morning dew. She had nothing, no food, no shelter, no name that anyone in the world would recognize, only the child within her, growing heavier with each passing day. She did not know how long she walked. The sun rose and set, then rose again. Sometimes she slept beneath twisted roots, other times beneath a net of stars. She learned to listen to the forest, to know which berries stained the tongue with sweetness and which brought pain, to hear the shift of leaves that meant shelter rather than danger. But she spoke to no one. There was no one, only the trees, only the wind, only her breath, counting the moments, and always the quiet beat of life beneath her ribs, a second heartbeat, fierce and steady, reminding her that she was not entirely alone. It was in the deep of autumn, when the leaves had begun to fall like golden ash, that Rapunzel came to a clearing. There, nestled in a hollow between two hills, stood a cottage, small, crooked, its roof sagging under the weight of moss and time. Smoke rose from its chimney. She stood on the edge of the clearing for a long while, unsure whether it was real, whether it was trap or blessing, but the baby kicked, hard and urgent, so she stepped forward. She knocked once, twice, then staggered back, her knees giving way. The door creaked open. An old woman stood there, her face lined with years, her eyes sharp with memory. Rapunzel tried to speak, but the world swam and she fell. She awoke in warmth, blankets, a fire, the smell of stew. The old woman sat nearby, shelling peas into a bowl, humming a tune that sounded like rain on a roof. "You're safe," she said, not looking up. For now. Rapunzel tried to rise. "Rest," said the woman. "The child is almost here." She was right. That very night, beneath the watchful eyes of old rafters and the gentle croon of forest wind, Rapunzel gave birth. Not to one child, but to two, twins, a boy and a girl. They came into the world quietly, as if they understood the hush of their mother's life, as if they too knew the language of silence. Rapunzel wept as she held them, not just from pain or joy, but from the release of something she hadn't dared name: survival. They were her stars now, her morning and evening, her truth. She named them Ash and Lark, for the tree that had once cradled her and the bird that still refused to sing. The old woman did not ask questions. She simply let them stay. Only for the winter, she warned. Come spring, you'll need to move on. The forest does not like guests who stay too long. So Rapunzel learned again how to live in the world, how to mend, how to gather, how to cook simple food over flame and rock the children to sleep with her voice. She did not sing often, not the way she had before. Her songs were quieter now, tired and warm, like lullabies stitched from smoke and shadow. But the children grew, and as they did, so did something else. A thought, a wish, that somewhere out there, beyond the tangled woods and ruined paths, someone still searched, that he still breathed, that Theron had not forgotten her name. In a part of the forest far from the hills, a man moved without sight. He had not spoken in weeks. His eyes were closed, not by sleep, but by spell. Dark scars where once had been light. He walked slowly, one hand on bark, one foot ever cautious. The birds did not flee him. The deer watched him with eyes full of wonder. He sang to himself, broken fragments of songs he barely remembered, humming tunes that felt like home. He carried no weapon. He needed none. The forest had accepted him as one of its own, and sometimes, when the wind was right, he would pause, stand still, and whisper, "Rapunzel." Spring came, soft and silver. The old woman was true to her word. "You cannot stay," she said gently, folding linens as the snow began to melt. "There's no harm in your children. But you, my dear, carry magic that bends things. Even the birds know it. It stirs the roots." Rapunzel bowed her head. "I don't know where to go." The woman smiled. "You'll know." And so, with the twins on her back and her hair tied in heavy braids to keep the forest from catching it, Rapunzel walked again. Not as before, not lost. This time she knew something was out there, not certainty, but possibility. She slept beneath boughs, sang lullabies into moss, named stars she'd never seen before, carved patterns into bark as markers for her return, and the children laughed. Their laughter became her compass. One dusk, while camped beside a gentle stream, Rapunzel sang. Not for the children, not to pass the time, but to remember. The song rose slowly, like mist. Her voice cracked, strengthened, flowed, and deep in the woods a man stirred. He had not eaten in days, but when the first note reached him, his head jerked upward, his mouth opened, and he whispered, "That voice?" He turned, blind eyes wide, and walked toward the sound. They found each other not with eyes, but with knowing. He stepped into the clearing where her fire crackled low, and she turned, startled, heart already racing. He paused. Tears spilled from her eyes. She stepped forward. "To Theron?" His face turned toward her, broken, sunken, hollow, but he smiled. "I knew I'd find you." She ran to him, pulling him close, pressing his hands to her cheeks. "It's me," she sobbed. "I'm here." His fingers traced her jaw, her hair, then her tears. "You're crying," he whispered, and as the drops touched his eyes, the spell broke. Light flooded his vision, not harsh, not blinding, just true. He saw her, truly saw her, golden and glowing, 2 children asleep nearby, her eyes wide with wonder and love, and he fell to his knees. "Rapunzel!" She pulled him into her arms, and there, in a forest clearing with only the stars above, they wept and laughed and held each other until morning. They were no longer broken, no longer wandering. They were home. Chapter 7. The Wild Years. They did not leave the clearing. Not for many days, and then not for many months. It wasn't fear that kept them. It wasn't need. It was something quieter, like moss finding root on stone. They stayed because it felt like the forest itself wished them to, because the trees opened just enough to let the sunlight in, because the river bent near them as if to listen, because the wind slowed its song as though cradling them in the hush between seasons. Rapunzel and Theron made a life, not from gold or grandeur, but from bark, breath, and patience. They began with nothing, no walls, no roof, just each other and the earth. They started with a ring of stones, a fire built gently in the middle. They slept on beds of moss, curled together beneath a sky that had no ceiling. The children nestled between them like fallen stars, warm, radiant, and mysterious. In the early mornings, while dew still clung to the grass, Rapunzel would walk barefoot along the creek, collecting herbs and memories. Theron would shape tools from wood and bone, the same way he once shaped dreams, carefully, hopefully, with hands that now remembered the shape of the world. The forest fed them. It was not generous, no wild land ever truly is, but it was fair. It gave what was needed if asked kindly: roots, berries, leaves for steeping, a stray egg in an abandoned nest, the occasional fish caught with a hand quick enough to matter. They learned, slowly. Rapunzel once wept after snaring a rabbit, stroking its fur as she murmured an apology. She buried the bones under a young sapling and sang a soft, aching song. After that, the family took only what they could honour. Ash and lark, their twins, grew as the trees did, upward and outward, wild and resilient. Lark was quiet, ever watching. She would follow the ants with solemn eyes, or whisper to beetles with deep reverence. Ash was louder, a little storm in soft boots, always climbing, always laughing, always naming things that didn't need names. They called the hawks sky cats and the dragonflies arrow fairies. They named the mossy rock throne of the forest and argued over who would rule it on which day. Their world was small, but vast enough to hold everything they needed. As seasons turned, Theron began to build. He started with branches and rope. A lean-to that leaned a little too far. Then came walls, low and lumpy, patched with clay. Over time the roof stopped leaking, the floor became smooth, and the hearth glowed like a second sun. By the end of the second summer they had a home, crooked but proud, tucked against a hill and blanketed in ivy, its windows open toward the rising sun. Its door was carved with spirals and stars. It did not look like a castle. But Theron had never loved a place more. "This is the only kingdom I need," he said one night, brushing dirt from his fingers. Rapunzel laughed, placing a sprig of mint behind his ear. "Then you're the muddiest king I've ever seen." He swept her up into his arms and spun her in the clearing, while Ash and Lark clapped and cheered, not knowing why, only that love was being flung into the air like leaves. They made traditions. On full moons they told stories by firelight, some true, some invented, some a beautiful braid of both. Rapunzel would light a candle for each tale, placing them in a circle, the flames flickering like listening spirits. On the first rain of spring they danced barefoot, splashing until their clothes clung like moss to skin. On the last frost of winter they made a feast of roots and stored apples to thank the earth for its endurance. Rapunzel wove her hair into ropes for swings and bridges. Theron taught the children to read maps made of trees to track time by stars. They built a ladder up the largest oak and called it the Watch Tree, where Lark often sat in silence, staring at the horizon. "What are you looking for?" Theron asked her once. She didn't turn her head. "Nothing," she said. "Everything." He understood. One autumn a man stumbled into the clearing, ragged, hungry, eyes wide as a hunted animal. He carried no weapon, only a broken flute tied to his belt. He collapsed near the creek. Rapunzel found him and brought water. Theron stitched his wound. Ash brought him a pine cone and whispered, "You're safe now." The man stayed a week. He left with tears in his eyes and a song on his breath. He told others. And so they came, one by one. A woman who had once been a knight and now only wanted to grow lavender. A boy who had run from war, carrying a single book and a fear he could not name. A pair of sisters who refused to live under stone roofs again. They came not in droves, but gently, like snow at first light, and Rapunzel welcomed each one. She gave them food and rest, taught them which berries could be trusted and which mushrooms to never touch. Theron built new cottages with their help. The clearing expanded, but never loudly. The trees were never cut, only shaped. The stream was never diverted, only listened to. A village bloomed, no name, no borders, only hearths and song and kindness. One night Rapunzel and Theron stood beneath the watch tree, arms wrapped around one another. Below them lanterns flickered. Laughter drifted. Someone played the broken flute, repaired now and full of song. Rapunzel rested her head on his chest. "This place," she said softly, "it was never meant to exist." "And yet," he replied, "here it is." She smiled. "A miracle." "No," Theron whispered. They aged slowly, gracefully, their hair silvered like moonlight, their hands lined with work and wonder, but their eyes remained bright. Ash grew tall, a protector of paths. He mapped the woods for miles and helped newcomers find their way. Lark became a healer. She spoke little, but her presence mended more than salves ever could. She often sat with the dying, holding their hands as they crossed quietly into mist. And though the world beyond the forest moved on, with kings rising and falling, wars stirring, empires forgetting, the clearing remained, a soft answer to a loud world. A place where the only crown was a garland of leaves, where the only throne was the moss-covered stone at the stream's bend, and in time When Rapunzel stood once more at the edge of the forest, hair braided down her back, watching fireflies dance between the trees, she whispered into the dark, "I am free." No one heard her, but the forest bowed its head. Chapter 8. The Healing and the Home. The forest no longer whispered in warnings. It hummed now, slow and steady, as if content to hold what it had once feared to lose. Years had passed like a quiet procession of candles, each flickering in its time, each leaving behind the scent of smoke and memory. The village had grown into a kind of secret, known to the kind-hearted and the weary, invisible to the cruel and the hurried. And in a small, vine-draped cottage at the centre of it all, Rapunzel sat at her window. She was older now. Her hair was silvered and soft, still long, still beautiful, but tied always in a single braid that hung beside her like a river in winter. She moved slowly, but with purpose. Her voice, though used more for stories than songs these days, was as soothing as warm milk and moonlight. She watched the sunrise every morning. With a cup of herb tea in hand, she'd whisper greetings to the birds, trace the fog as it drifted over the ferns, and smile at the path where footprints always came and went, some small, some wide, some old. Theron brought her fresh water and carved new shelves when needed. His beard had gone grey and his shoulders stooped, but his eyes still found hers across the garden and lit up like they had the very first time. He still called her sunlight, even on cloudy days. Ash and Lark had cottages of their own now, not far, just through the fern path and over the creek bridge. Ash had a daughter with laughter like bells, and Lark raised bees and brewed honey wine, her quiet hands gentler than any spell. They came often, with baskets and stories, with questions and laughter. There was peace, not perfect, not without sorrow, but real. When someone in the village grew ill, Lark brought herbs, Rapunzel sang beside the bed, and Theron sat by the door with his old walking stick, ready to fetch more if needed. When someone passed, the trees were asked first before a grave was made. The birds were silent that morning, always. And afterward, everyone gathered to speak of love. No one in the forest was ever buried alone. One evening, after the stars had bloomed and the lanterns had been lit, a small boy with tangled curls knocked on Rapunzel's door. He looked no older than 6, a newcomer's child, perhaps. He held a pine cone in one hand and a question in the other. "Is it true," he asked, "that you once lived in a tower that touched the clouds?" Rapunzel smiled, beckoning him inside. She sat him beside the fire, handed him a mug of warmed oat milk and said, "Would you like to hear the story?" He nodded so hard his curls bounced. And so she told it. Not all of it, not the pain in full, but enough. She spoke of a high room with one window, of a braid let down to the earth, of songs that carried through trees, of love that found its way without a path. She told of sorrow and wandering, of blindness and babies, of healing and home. The boy fell asleep before the end, curled up on the rug with the pine cone still in hand. She placed a blanket over him and sat back in her chair, watching the fire, remembering and grateful. That night she dreamed, not of the tower, not any more. She dreamed of the clearing when it was still silent, of the first fire, of the first song sung into wild air, of Theron's hand in hers, shaking slightly but sure. She dreamed of the way the wind had once carried her voice to him, and how, even now, after so many years, it still did. She woke with tears on her cheeks. But they were not sad. They were just full. The next day, Theron planted a new tree by the cottage. "Why this one?" Rapunzel asked, pressing a hand to its slender trunk. "It's called a wishing elm," he said. "They say it remembers everything spoken beneath its leaves. And what will we tell it?" He looked at her, eyes soft. "Our story," she smiled. "Then it will grow well." And so it did. The tree grew, slow and kind, leaves catching the songs Rapunzel hummed as she swept the porch, roots curling toward the old tower stones they'd buried years ago. Not to forget, but to remember differently. Children played beneath it, lovers carved initials into its bark, and when night came, lanterns were hung from its branches, glowing like stars within reach. In time, the forest whispered a new story, one not of a girl stolen or a prince cast down, but of a woman who sang the world awake, of a man who followed a voice through darkness, of children raised by moss and moonlight, of a village born from longing and shaped by love. No one called it Rapunzel's forest, and she would not have wanted them to. But her name was known, spoken softly, with reverence, with gratitude, and always, always with peace.